Someone today sent me a QI quote from Stephen Fry about the origins of Christmas and how Christmas was not so much about Saturnalia, but about the festival of Mithras, this dying, rising god man who had a feast involving 12 followers and all of this was celebrated on the 25th of December. When people put up their Christmas trees, of course, the Christmas tree represents, well, the star represents the light of the Star of Bethlehem, the gifts under the tree, the gifts of the Magi, the lights around the tree, the host of angels that are celebrating the eighth day of creation, and bringing the festival into the home in the traditions of bringing greenery into the home, as in the story of King Arthur and or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But there is another angle, and that is very much the province of a fellow called Richard Carrier, whose ideas I think are absolutely fascinating. This sort of extreme mythos theory. And Richard Carrier suggests that Jesus was a celestial being who was somehow later historicized, fitting into a larger trend that historicizes mythical figures in ancient religions. According to Carrier, early Christians believed Jesus' crucifixion occurred in the celestial realm, just below the moon, within the sphere controlled by demonic powers, and this concept wasn't unique. Examples include Osiris, the death and resurrection that occurred in the celestial domain. Romulus, passion plays, reenacted his death and apotheosis. And Philo of Alexandria's identification of a celestial being named Jesus, the pre-existent firstborn Son of God, who acts as a divine intermediary. According to 1 Corinthians 15, early Christians derived their understanding of Jesus' death, resurrection, and purpose from scriptures, not from historical events. Paul's writings, says Carrier, in Galatians and Romans, emphasize Jesus' communication through revelation and scripture, and they lack references to an earthly ministry or historical details about Jesus' life. These come later from the Gospels. And he's got an expression, what is it, euhemerization, the process of transforming celestial deities into historical figures. Mithras merged Persian and Zoroastrian beliefs with Roman mystery cults and became a real person. Osiris and Isis, the Egyptian cult, integrated into Hellenistic practices. Romulus translated from mythic state into a godlike character, a narrative of apotheosis, where he becomes deified. And Christianity fits this trend, adopting Jewish apocalyptic ideas and merging them with Hellenistic mystery religions. And he cites evidence for this celestial, not the historical Jesus, in Paul's authentic letters. Jesus as a divine being revealing truths through visions, because Paul never met Jesus. There's no mention of a Galilean ministry or human interactions. I find the wonderful event in The Last Temptation of Christ where Paul meets the Jesus who has come down from the cross, and Jesus said, well, you're talking about someone different. I'm not this person. And Jesus and Paul says, I'm not interested in historical Jesus. I'm interested in the Jesus of my visions. And Carrier draws on the ascension of Isaiah, this Christian text presenting Jesus' crucifixion in a celestial realm, not on the earth. He then looks at the allegories in the gospel. The fig tree parable in Mark, for example, symbolizes God's rejection of the Jewish temple, illustrating the allegorical nature of gospel stories. And commentaries in the mystery cult, saviors of divine parentage, of victory over death shared with followers, of passion stories involving sacrifice and suffering. And he instances Romulus, Zalmoxis, Osiris, And he says there's practical reasons for creating a historical narrative. Control over doctrinal disputes, of apostolic succession, of canonization, and the need to fit this sort of Jewish Jewish messianic prophecies into historical Roman events. And the early Christian attempts to silence dissent, Ignatius of Antioch's insistence on an earthly Jesus to combat the docetic, the celestial only view. So Docetism was real, and what Carrier is doing is to revive that tradition and say that is the more likely origin. Carrier argues that the phrase about brothers in the Lord refers to baptized Christians, not biological siblings. Born of David's lineage, Paul's Greek phrasing suggests a divine manufacture like Adam's creation. And Carrier also references the Jesus mentioned, well, loosely mentioned in Tacitus or Josephus, were interpolations, and they lack independent corroboration. They're forgeries, which have been put into the text to justify the persecution of Christians and to explain the persecution of Christians later on, and to suggest that there is a figure behind all this, but there's no independent proof of this figure existing. It doesn't mean the Christian story is any less significant or that Christmas is any less significant. It just simply means that if Carrier is right, that one's looking at a religious tradition which is based on mythos rather than history. And if the mythic ideas are correct, the Jesus story may be a masterpiece of theological creativity, not a historical biography. And I find that very interesting. It doesn't make it any the less real, but it sort of it answers a few interesting questions. Now I'm certainly not going to I'm not going to suggest that Carrier is absolutely right, but he's worth considering, and I think his ideas are fascinating. I think they're significantly more focused and credible than the rubbish about Mythos, which is fanciful and with very little textual evidence. I think this is the fanciful embellishments of the 19th century. But Carrier, particularly with his very careful textual analysis, is looking at something which I think is a clever interpretation, and it's worth considering rather than dismissing.